Hey y'all! Today I'm going to be showing you how to fur a dinomask without a balaclava. A lot of tutorials that I see for furring dinomasks, you need a balaclava for it, but personally, I don't really like using them. I decided last minute that I was going to do a tutorial, so I'll just explain what I've done so far. So what I've done is I've just replaced the usual plastic straps with elastic. And make sure that you wrap these around and that they're very secure. And then what I've done here, about an inch away from the head, I added another piece of elastic that goes all the way around. Like an inch away here as well. And then all I've done is just cut out an ear shape that I want out of foam, carved it, smoothed it out, done all of that. And then I just glued it onto the elastic here, and back here. And this is what it looks like. Something that I would like to note, if you want to add like horns or anything onto yours, it's going to be a little bit more difficult because usually you just attach them to a balaclava like this, but for me, I'm just going to have to sew it straight onto the fur. So yeah, if you have a lot of different attachable parts, I would recommend building on a balaclava. But for dinomasks that just have ears, this method works great. I use this same method for this dinomask, so if that's the kind of result that you're wanting, then this is the tutorial to follow. Before you start doing anything, you have to make sure that the neck of your mannequin has been padded up with all shirts and just spare fabric and anything. Because otherwise you're going to find that it's way too tight to wear. Once this is padded up, you're going to need some cling wrap, or blah blah, or whatever you call it. What you're going to need to do is just wrap the whole head in cling wrap. I usually start at the neck and wrap it around and then just keep weaving in and out through the ears. When you do the cling wrap, you really only need it to here because we're going to be adding a whole neck piece later. It should look something like this. You don't need this much cling wrap, I just went a little overboard. Also for me personally, my pattern is symmetrical, so I'm only going to tape one half of the head because it means I can just copy it on the other side. But if your pattern is asymmetrical or it's different on both sides, then you're going to have to pattern and tape the whole head. Next, what you're going to need is just some cheap duct tape. And you're just going to duct tape on the center, if your pattern is symmetrical, all the way around where you've just cling wrapped. And as I said before, you really only need to stop here. To do this, you cut out a lot of small pieces instead of doing these massive long ones, because then it actually gives you the right shape. Something I forgot to note, you should also put a piece of cling wrap here on the chin so that there would be enough fur to put it there. For these duct tape pieces, I'd aim not to go really any bigger than this. But yeah, you just stick it like I have, just all around. And make sure you're going right up to the edge of the mask. Similar to what I said before, make sure that your tape is going right up to the edge of your ears. Once you're done, it should look something like this. Now what you're going to want to do is just grab any marker and start drawing your pattern onto this as you want it to look with the fur. When you're marking your pattern, really only draw up to this point because again we're going to be adding this neck piece later where you can draw the rest of your patterns. The more you draw in here now is the more patterns that you're going to have to sew together and cut out and whatnot. When you draw your patterns, make sure that you label the fur direction and what color you want it to be. This just makes things easier to organize later. And make sure that you label your fur direction for any other parts. If you're not sure about fur direction, just try searching up fur direction on Pinterest and Google, and there should be some general guides on there. But generally, all the fur should move away from the head. Once you've drawn on all your patterns, fur directions, and fur colors, you can take this off. I just simply slid mine over my ears. But if you pattern the whole head, not just half, I would cut it straight down the middle and then take it off the ears. When you cut it off, it should generally look like this. There might be a different hole depending on where your ears or horns or anything are. Something to make tracking your patterns a little bit easier, what you do is you just make two little lines like this so that you know where to attach each pattern. I kind of just do this for every pattern that I have on my mask. Now you're just going to want to cut all your patterns out from your whole base. I try to keep all my patterns in the same spot as where I found them so that I don't get confused, especially when I have similar patterns. You'll find that in many areas your pattern is not flat, so what you'll need to do is grab your scissors and make some cuts where it isn't flat. So here, I literally just make a cut like that. And it basically just should look like this everywhere. The purpose of this is that so later, when you cut these pieces out, you can sew these together and it'll make it round again. So again, just so I remember, I make a little line through here so I know to sew those two together. And I just do that for every part that I've cut out. It's best to trace the pattern that you've just cut out onto paper, but I'm lazy so I just leave it as duct tape. But if you're a beginner, I would recommend doing that because it makes it tracing onto fur so much easier later. Oh, and one more thing that I forgot to mention, I'd cut your fur into parts so that you have the fur direction facing the right way. If I cut out this orange part as just all one part, the fur direction would be all wrong. So, for example, I just cut this into sections like this so that I have this as one piece, this is one piece, and that as one piece. And now this is why it's important to keep all your pieces together, because it starts getting really confusing. Once you have all your pieces traced, just grab the color that you need for your fur and grab a piece that corresponds to that. When you're tracing, make sure that your fur direction corresponds to where your fur is actually facing, and make sure that you flip your pattern, which is very, very important. Then you just trace out your pattern and remember to label any points that you have like this. And then before cutting it out, I recommend adding this much seam allowance just so that you have enough room to sew. And cut this much around the whole piece. Once the piece is cut out, I just grab my brush and brush out any excess fur. And now you have the first puzzle piece to your whole hood. If you're like me and you have a symmetrical pattern, I'm just going to place this pattern now the other way and trace this out and do the same whole process because I just need to make two sides. Repeat this process for all your patterns until you basically have all your puzzle pieces. Okay, so there was a little bit of a time skip, but we're back. So once you've cut out all of your pieces, oh girl, what I've just done is laid them out where I want to sew everything together. I haven't cut these out, but ignore that. So before sewing anything for the hood, what I like to do is get started on the ears. Now what you do is you just follow the exact same process that I just told you with, the taping, the cling wrap, etc. And then just do the same for the ears. And now again, for most people, because the ears are basically the same, then you only have to tape one ear and then you can just flip it for the other side. Boom shakalak. So once that's all taped, I'm just going to do the same thing, fur direction, color, and mark out my patterns. And now I'm going to cut each of these pieces out. And then once that's all cut out, I just make those little cuts everywhere so that I can make it flat. Yeah, and once again, you only need to make the cuts in the areas that don't sit flat like this. And just a reminder when tracing, always remember to do the fur direction, copy the patterns that you did, and flip your pattern. I'm going to do a cool transition where everything's going to be sewed together. Kaboom! And now with your two hood pieces, you just attach them here and on the edges here. You don't need to worry about any of this because this is where the mask actually sits. Something that makes your result look way better is that when you're pinning it together, make sure that your similar seams are lining up. Because my pattern is symmetrical, most of these designs should come to the same point. Like as you can see here, these two stripes are exactly parallel from each other. This just makes sure that all your patterns on your hood doesn't look wonky. And then after I've sewed everything together, I like to just do a little test fit to see how everything's looking. And if you don't think any adjustments need to be made, you can start the neck. The first thing you want to do for the neck is draw out a pattern that kind of resembles this. The size of this should be the same diameter as your hood. This kind of pointy piece goes at the front and this bit sits at the back. And I just split it into two pieces with this fur direction going that way and the back going that way. Simply, all you want to do is just draw what pattern you want to have for your neck. And just do that whole same process, trace it onto the fur, etc., and then attach it to the neck. Here's my whole neck piece, now I'm going to sew it together. Kaboom! And then again, I like to just do a little test fit to make sure that everything fits. Now, this is a good time to note that you don't actually need to make this neck piece. Like to fur a dinomask, you can just leave it like this, but I personally think this just makes it look cleaner. To make sure my neck isn't crooked, before I sew it, I pin everything together. I line up the point where I sewed the two halves of the hood together, where I sewed the half of the neck. Make sure you have the rounded bit at the back, and the pointy one at the front. You don't have to have it pointy and rounded like this, but that's just my style, how I do it. And also do the seam where I attached it at the front with the seam on this one. And if the hole for your neck doesn't fit because it's too small, you can always trim it so it fits the width of the hood. Now for this bit, you can choose to hand sew it or machine sew. If you have strong stitches, I would recommend hand sewing it because it's way easier. But because I'm lazy and this is a personal suit, I'm just gonna use a sewing machine. And now your hood is complete! Next step is to glue everything onto the mask. I would highly recommend getting a mannequin to put your mask on because this makes this process so much easier. When I'm gluing, I'm just gonna line up my patterns to where I want it on the mask. But one thing to note that's very, very important, when you're gluing around the hinges, don't glue on this part here where the jaw opens up. What I like to do is leave a little gap where my fabric's bunched up like this, so that when I open the jaw, there's enough room for it to stretch. I'm just going to start at the top and work my way down. It's hard to do on camera, but all you need to do is just put a little line of hot glue and then glue your fabric on. And then to make my edges look seamless, I just put a little bit of hot glue, like this, and just push my fur onto there. This just makes sure you can't see this line. Here's a better look at the seam, and as you can see, I've not glued where that hinges. And now your hood is done. I'll come up with a part 2 with everything else that you need, but yeah, I hope you found this helpful. Bye! This is part 2 on how to fur a dino mask without a balaclava. So, once you have your whole hood done, which I showed how to do in part 1, now it's time for these ears. Now, I showed before in the last part, it's just the same process of taping and tracing a pattern and stuff. Now, everyone's ears is going to look a little bit different, so yours most likely won't look exactly like mine. But once I've cut out my pieces, before doing anything, I'm going to shave the fur. This is optional. You can leave the ears fluffy, but I think that when you shave them, it just looks nicer in comparison with the rest of the fur. So, of course, when you're shaving, wear a mask, and make sure that your area is well ventilated with like windows open and whatever. I'm just using these pet clippers, but they're not very great, so I would not recommend. But I don't have anything else. And when I'm shaving, I'm just going to turn this to the highest setting and just go in the direction of the fur. So this is just after like one little row of shaving, but I'm going to do it multiple times until I have a thickness that I like. Parts that I'm shaving is the inner ear, like the outside of the ear, but I'm not going to shave this little white fluffy bit. I would also recommend brushing out your fur after each little bit that you shave. And then once I've shaved this to a length that I like, I'm just going to trim off these little fluffy edges a little bit, just with these orange fabric scissors. And now, once you have all your pieces shaved, you'll just need to sew all these bits together. Now, once you have all these sewed up, you've just got to attach your pieces to where you marked them. So for me, when I was patterning, I did these 2 lines so that I know to connect this to that. And now you just pin everything together and sew it up for each ear. Once you've got your 2 ears sewn, all you'll need to do is just slip them onto the ears. To secure the ears to the hood, you'll need to do a ladder stitch all around the base of the ear. You simply do this by picking up the fabric on the outside of each part and pulling it closed. Repeat this on the entire outside and for each ear. And then once you've ladder stitched both ears to the hood, your dino mask is basically done. Now, if you want to leave it as this, that's completely fine. But I'm going to add some extras to give it some personality. First up, if you have any horns, it's basically a really similar process. All you do is put the horn where you want it on the hood, and just ladder stitch it with the same method that we did for the ears. When sewing your horns on, or really anything attaching to the hood, I would recommend investing in one of these curved needles, because it can get kind of tedious, and this just makes it way easier. And now once you've got your horns or anything you want to attach to the hood done, it's time for the cheek fluff. Now with the cheek fluff, all you need to do is just grab any piece of paper and trace kind of a shape that you want. Make sure this inner bit follows the shape of the mask, and you can make your cheek fluff a triangle, circular, have little, divots or whatever. It can be anything. And your fur direction, as always, will go away from the muzzle. And your cheek fluff can be multiple colors, like I did on Basil. But for me, I'm just going to do this as one solid color of orange. For the fur direction, simply you just need to trace this shape twice on this side, and then flipped twice. And then once you have that trace, simply cut it out with seam allowance, and then you'll want to group the flip piece with the normal piece. When you're sewing these, it's important to only sew along here, but keep this bottom bit open. And when you're pinning it together, try to tuck in as much of this fluff behind the fabric as you can, because otherwise all of this is going to be trapped in the seam. In my opinion, if you hand sew the cheek fluff, then it will give it a better, fluffier look, especially if you have multiple colors. So as you can see here, I paired the flip piece with the non-flip piece. I just used a blanket stitch all around the outside edge, and I tucked in as much fur as I could. And then you just repeat that for the other side. And then when you finish both, you can just turn it inside out and give it a brush. So once you've done all that process, flipped everything inside out, just place it where you think it looks good, and just like the horns and the ears, just do a ladder stitch all around the edge. The reason why we didn't close this up is because you want to keep it a little bit open when you're sewing it. This just makes the cheek look more natural. So by that I mean you'll sew this relatively close to the edge here, and the back of it a little bit further down. But yeah, this is basically what it ends up looking like. Now the last thing I have to do for this mask is add a bit of hair or / a mohawk that goes all the way down the mask. So if you're creating a mohawk like me, you want to kind of follow a similar shape. This curved bit follows the shape of the dino mask, and I just have this little hair poof at the front so it gives it a little more But if you just want to create a little hair floof that goes kind of from here to here, you'll create this shape but then kind of taper it off here. For the hair poof, I have the fur direction facing out this way. For the mohawk, I have it facing inwards like this. That's because when we flip it, fur direction is going to be facing together, like we did for the cheek fluff. So if you have a mohawk that goes all the way down, your fur direction is going to change. So I'm just going to cut it in like this center point here. And because this hair poof is also in a different direction, I'll just cut this piece out here. And then remember, add your little lines so that you know where to sew it. And then you just trace this onto the color you want, with obviously the fur direction corresponding to your fur. So when tracing it, obviously I followed the fur direction, and I just did the pattern once normal and then once flipped. After you've cut out your pieces, the first thing you want to do is just connect any parts that you have together. But if you have a hair floof, you might not have to do this. And then once you've got all your pieces sewn together, you'll only need to sew the top half of the hair. Like we did with the cheek fluff, we'll leave this bottom open so that it'll have more depth when we sew it. And when you're sewing it together, just double check that your fur direction is going towards each other. After you've sewn it together, your fur should be kind of coming together like this. Before sewing it to the hood, I just like to lightly stuff the inside of this. And then, like we did with the other parts of the hood, you just have to lattice stitch the hair to the hood. Right. Just lattice stitch this side all the way down, and then that side. And now once you've done all of that, your hair should be pretty secure. Kaboom, you have a finished dinomask. I hope that some of you found this tutorial helpful, and if you have any questions or anything, just let me know in the comments.
Yippee.
Also, I realized that I just made the cheek fluff too big, so I'm just gonna sew those on now.
Bye.